So I'm super excited for today's podcast. I will not be part of it. We're bringing two of the incredible souls that are part of Curated. If you have not met Steven before, then you're not watching our AMG videos. So Steven Duncan Peters, our AM genius with the team. And Gabe, and if you haven't met Gabe, there's some great videos of him delivering some crazy hypercars and stuff like that. And I think really there's two reasons why I wanted to bring them on today and sort of let them just go wild when it comes to talking about this next generation. And I would really say their generation. I'm about to be 40. And a lot of our clients, sometimes who are older than me or of my generation, always ask me, what do you think will happen in 10 years? Or what do you think is going to happen with hybrids? Or what do you think is going to happen with electric vehicles and manufacturers? And I always pose a great point, and that is, I have never seen in my lifetime more younger people interested in the cars of their past. When I was growing up, kids or people my age in their 20s or 18, 25, whatever it may be, they were not talking about cars from the 80s or the 90s. They were not collecting these cars. Steven can tell you a little bit about what he personally owns and drives. Gabe can tell you a little bit about what he personally owns and drives. But I think they are a testament to really a massive generation. The second thing, and Gabe is going to hate me for saying this, but I definitely want to know what inspired their passions, what inspired Steven's passions, what inspired Gabe's passions. But one of the things I realized recently when talking to a few clients is this massive shift and sort of, what inspired a generation was video games, whether it was Gran Turismo, Need for Speed. We've had numerous clients that have actually called us and said specifically, I want that car that was in that video game. And imagine, I think the stat is like 80 million users were addicted or raced with Gran Turismo. So completely insane, whatever you played, whether it was Forza or whatnot. I think it plays a big important fact. And then I think the other thing, and they can speak on this as well, is all of the spotters and the spotter generation, the Instagram generation. We never had this many years ago. My personal opinion is we have a long life cycle of young people that are into these cars, that are passionate about these cars from the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, and maybe they're going to enlighten us today and talk about some later cars. Both of them have inspired us to buy Bugatti Veyrons, Lexus LFAs. So I love these guys to death. They are part of our family. They're like little brothers to me, and excited to hear their thoughts on the future of car collecting.
So my name is Steven. I handle all manner of things here at Curated, everything from intake to acquisitions and operate a little bit of operations and kind of all manner of things here. But one of my true loves is early AMG Mercedes and kind of really fine-tune the details and looking all over on what makes these cars special. So that's kind of a little bit about me on what my role is here. I've had a long background of cars where, started life playing with Hot Wheels. I always had a passion with it. My father got into collector cars in 2010, but always had a passion for it. So then bought a car in 2010, a 560 SEC that I safely say changed my life and put the trajectory of that. And he purchased a Lamborghini Countach in 2010, and that was one of the other cars that I think changed my life, and then one of the reasons why I'm here today.
Unlike Steven, I didn't grow up around cars. I actually grew up in New York City in Manhattan, and if you needed to get around, you'd take a subway, you'd walk, you'd bike, you'd grab a taxi. Your mom would maybe drop you off at school if you were lucky. Ironically enough, I grew up 2 blocks from my middle school, so I walked every day, never had much car time. The only time I'd be in a vehicle was if I was in a taxi or if I was going to see my grandparents on the weekends with my mom and dad. That'd be kind of like the one time where the whole family was stuck against our better will with each other in a car for 3-4 hours to go see grandma. And when I moved down to Miami for school, for university, my head lit on fire, and I was constantly coming into contact with a bunch of supercars, new and stuff, Huracans and the average kind of Miami run-of-the-mill stuff putzing around. And my story kind of unfolded in a very interesting I call it serendipitous way, where I ended up getting an internship at a Lamborghini dealership and then went on to do a bunch of really cool things. So while Steven's more of kind of like the AMG guy, I have a little bit of reputation of being kind of a BMW guy. So we're very complimentary, and that's why we're such good friends. We kind of, we balance each other out. The stuff that I might not be so up on, Steven's an expert beyond, and I rely on him for tons of information. And some of the stuff that's kind of a bit, I would say, of a different kind of generation maybe, Steven is extremely knowledgeable about, but I have a bit more experience in terms of just dealing with in a transactory manner in terms of the actual car business. So we have a lot of fun together, and there's no rivalries. He knows that BMWs go around the track better 9 out of 10 times than a Mercedes. My only contact with cars growing up was in the back of my dad's 7 Series or whatever other family saloon car he had. So very different than Steven. So we really are two peas in a pod, but from different kind of sides of the car life and car world and passion and stuff like that. So what was your first car?
So my first
SEC?
So my first car, which I still have today, is a 1989 560 SEC. Made every mistake of the book. Bought a northern car, sight unseen, and I'd say that was probably the car that really changed my life of moving forward in that. So that was my first car. My father said you could have anything you want as long as it was an 80s Mercedes, and whatever you saved up, you can spend. So, which is one of the best lessons I've ever had. So, what was your first car?
That's awesome. I somehow snuck into driver's ed right as soon as I was old enough to do it. And I made a deal with my dad that if I got above a 3.5 GPA first semester of college, that he'd get me a car. And a main reason that I actually went to University of Miami was because I knew that in Florida, unlike New York City, there was no opportunity to travel by foot or bicycle, or anything like that. You need a car. So I barely scraped by. I got a 3.6. My dad got me. He was very generous. He leased me a brand new 4 Series Grand Coupe with completely I think I had a sunroof and heated seats, which was awesome. Non-M Sport against my desire. If I had the 435 at the time, I would have killed myself for sure. So that was the first car that I had, but I didn't own it. Similarly to you, my first car that I owned, which came on a loan from my mother, love you mom, thanks, was a 95 E36 M3 sunroof delete, and I still have that car too. We're both very lucky that we both still own our first cars, because I hear so many stories from people about, oh man, my first car was this, I wish I still had it, can you help me track it down? I get asked that all the time.
All the time.
And so even though there have been many moments where it was more rational for me to let go of my first M3, I still have mine too. So it's cool that you have yours as well. And it's kind of been it's a never-ending project.
It's a never-ending project.
Yeah,
it's a never-ending project. I can think of that car, man, I've driven that car from DC all the way to Georgia and back with somebody we'll mention later, then took it out to spent time with it in Kansas and going there, and when I spent my time at McPherson College there, but it's every opportunity to what would have been rational to get rid of the car, whether it's storage, service, maintenance, it's not giving up on that project at all.
Yeah, I got a whole pile of parts in my kitchen right now for that thing, and it doesn't. I've spent significantly more money on parts than I have on the actual car. But
and time.
Yeah, and time. Yeah, of course. But that's what we love that. And
but it's the lessons that you learn from those projects that carried over. It's the same things, exposing yourself to that then I applied to larger deals and things here today, even experiences with that.
Yeah. Yeah, we run into so many situations at the store where a customer might want to go overkill on kind of, restoring things that are fine the way they are and original. And Steven's always quick to be like, just leave it alone.
Yep.
Like it's only original once. It's a lot of these cars that we deal in are not stuff to be highly modified, but when it comes to your first car, I would say that it's kind of like this never-ending thing of like always getting it to achieve it's kind of supreme form. So unfortunately, that's carried over to me to a lot of my other cars as well. It's a disease, it's a sickness, but you've got way cooler story than me in terms of your history of I would say seeing opportunities before they blossomed into one, kind of getting in on the ground level. And I've had the chance to sell some with your help, AMG hammers and some cool pre-merger SECs and all kinds of interesting stuff. But I'd love for
So I think,
I'd love there to be
I think a
some
little bit of
time on your
background
story.
with some of that car and how I came into those cars and understanding the story and the history and the people that were involved at that. I think that's the most important thing is, even here at Curated, the company culture is people. So, and that's when you really boil down to what was one of the most interesting things of those AMG cars, and what exposed me to them was the stories that they created and what they did. So with my SEC, I'll kind of give a timeline of what happened. So, and the lesson that was learned of buying the wrong car, sight unseen in a northern car, and these will all come back. So always ran into problems with it going through where, I would, was running, I was running warm and then running on the forums. When we used to look at that for information, there was always a guy that came through, always had the answers. And I remember calling his shop and, 3 times in a row on one Tuesday, he spent an hour on the phone with me, discussing through like, hey, these are your problems, this is this, and being frustrated. I was like, okay, well, what do I need to do? How do I fix this? When I was broke, I had no money, I couldn't figure this out. So number one, it had to run right, but then as a teenager, we wanted to go faster and look cooler. So I was like, great, let me get AMG body kit. And then, well, what's the part number? And then I go and try to find that, and it's discontinued, doesn't exist. And then I found out that, that company, although it exists today, all those parts and everything that was for those cars are gone. They didn't make a lot. They weren't very good. They disappeared. They got beat up. But there's a stash of them somewhere. And there's a guy in California that has all of these. And the gentleman in Atlanta, he also had these cars, and he had some more of the SECs, the SELs, the 4-doors, and he had the 124, and he had one of these Hammers, which was the most extreme variant of the early AMGs, where, for those that aren't familiar, they took the biggest engine that they could and they shoved it in the smallest car possible. And for me, that was just incredible that they took the stock engine, doubled the horsepower, and then dropped it into the smallest platform, where it was almost the Shelby Cobra formula of dropping the biggest car they could in the smallest package, but then had the German engineering. Then the 60 to 120 beat the Lamborghini Countach, which to me was like, this is the greatest car. This was the poster car.
Supreme form of like,
right.
If somebody could take their first car, so to speak, and like make it as good as possible.
Exactly.
In a sense.
Exactly. And for me, the intrigue was, everywhere I read, everyone says, why do you want these? Why do you want, like, they're problematic, they're troublesome? And everyone said no. And then I said, well, this is cool. Like, why are you pushing me away? Why can't I see this stuff? So I think going back more with the timeline of buying the parts, getting frustrated, working on it myself, and learning how to do a limited amount of wrenching, but, doing basic servicing. And then, when it got more complicated with front end work and suspensions and, with the amount of spring work, I said, let me go down, let me send my car to this guy. And then kind of one of my paths were getting exposed to these cars and seeing them was seeing this shop where this guy, it was just kind of this random industrial shop, and going through, and then there was this car that was just sitting back there, and this guy owned the AMG Hammer wagon. It was the only one that was ever made, and it was just sitting there like at his open carport, just outside. And I remember being enamored with it, waking up one morning and just walking outside and seeing this car, and I realized it was one of one. It was $250,000 in the 80s, which was more than the Countach at the time. It was unreal, and just being enamored with it because of just everything that went into making that, and having this one-of-one car, and chasing that feeling of like, this is the only one in the world, and realizing how special it was in that moment. So, and going through that, and making trips back and forth with my car in the SEC, and then watching the progression of the build of like, taking the suspension, getting H&R springs, and doing a group buy with him of like, hey, we need to sell this amount of sway bars because these parts don't exist. So then we can actually remove some of the anti-roll and make them a little bit stiffer and a little bit more hot rod, because you couldn't get these parts. So you had to make everything. And then going through and watching the progression of that car, it eventually got to the point where my bill got so big where I couldn't pay for it. Couldn't pay. I didn't have the money. And I said, hey, I can't pay for this now. Let me work for you for a summer to pay off my bill. And he was okay with that. So that was kind of one of the things where I was thrown into the fire of like, hey, you're there at 8 and we leave at 10 o'clock at night and you rinse and repeat. So it was everything from sweeping the floors, getting parts, doing basic services, detailing, just client relations, and being in that shop was all related to that first car, and kind of chasing, performance and individuality.
And I see how that came full circle to today, because that's a lot of what we do here.
Full circle.
And you're still doing it, and on AMGs, just, if anything, more of them. So that's so cool. But so that's the story of your SEC. And with my M3, it was not nearly as romantic as that. I mean, I ran this thing into the ground. Nice. I mean, all I could afford was tires and an oil change. I think that's all I did my first 12,000 miles of ownership.
Yeah.
And when I finally started to get some other people their dream cars and made a couple bucks, I ended up just like going on Turner Motorsport. I think my buddy raced for Turner. I was like, hey, can you get me like a discount code?
Yeah, right.
Like, I kind of want to have my first car in its final form moment. You think you could help me out? He made a call. I think all they did was throw in like free T-shirts or something. You know, they were the wrong size, and I ended up spending an obscene amount of money on parts. And I had to find somebody to do it. Anyways, it's been 4 years. The car's still. I just you know I spent all this money. I got this upgraded steering rack. It was defective, and I'm like, you know, driving this car with all these parts and everything on it, and all of a sudden the steering feels like just like crap, and I'm like, really? Like after all this time and money, I can't even enjoy like driving the car like on a normal road. So anyways, new steering rack's going in now. Super excited about that. But that's so cool, man. And so it's incredible how that led you to where you are today. For me, I have a similar story with what in between the 4 Series and the E36 was for me, and it's kind of a little similar ethos than to the Hammer, I guess, in a sense, if you made a stretch. Was when I was working at this Lambo dealer, I came in there, I knew nothing about the business. I just somehow got a gig as an intern, which I have to thank a guy by the name of Daniel over at Prestige 4 and Brett David who hired me. But Daniel got me in the door, and so I'm an intern now. I'm 20 years old. I love cars. I've had no exposure to anything. I grew up in New York City. You know, I come down to Miami. If I see a Huracan in the middle of the road, I'm like freaking out, right? And now I'm thrown in to the fire at Prestige Imports, Lamborghini Miami, one of the top Lambo stores in the country, probably one of the top hypercar dealers in North America, and supercar dealers. And I have access to all the keys. You know, it's kind of like you being like similar to being at that shop in Atlanta with all these AMGs. I'm all of a sudden just a general car guy, you know, and I'm playing with all these big boy toys. And I end up working there for free for about 10 months. Similarly to you, I'm sweat equity, just busting my chops there, trying to make things happen. And it was time for me to go back to college because at the time I had taken some time off from school to be there. There's a little more to that story, but the punchline is that it was time for me to go back to school. My parents were like, you can't be driving around Lamborghinis all day, you know, for the rest of your life. You got to go back to college. You got to do the thing. Right. So I end up having a meeting with Brad, and he's like, yeah, maybe we'll hire you. We want to hire you. We'll see. And what do you want to do? It's like, I want to do marketing. He was like, okay. He's like, I can't pay you anything near what you want to be paid, so let's figure something out. And I ended up going to look my parents in the eye and being like, look, like, I don't know how to tell you guys this, but Brett gave me a job in sales, and I'm going to end up being a used car dealer. Yeah. And for your parents who were always there for you to go from, you know, you leaving college and working at a Lambo dealer, which is great, you're having fun, but now you're not going back to school, you're going to be a used car salesman. It's always a funny story, and I love telling it, and this is the abridged version now, but I ended up getting put in sales, and now I know nothing about the car business. I know a thing or two about, you know, BMWs and Lambos, and just from general car passion knowledge, and I'm sure any of the viewers could appreciate. You know, it's just general passion for the automobile and for supercars and stuff, and always thinking that they were the coolest thing. And now I'm in sales, and I'm supposed to be able to consult people on the process of buying this, and I know nothing about it. Right. So I sell a couple cars. I think my first week I sold a Huracan Performante. I sold like a Maserati Quattroporte, which was funny because my dad had one of those at the time, so it was like a little weird thing there. Anyways, I'm like, you know what? I think I need a car that can keep up with my clients, right? Like, it's an extension of your brand. Yeah, well, I just kind of also was a little like, you know, I just wanted to go fast. Like, everyone's going fast. I'm helping people go fast. Like, I want to go fast. So the next logical step was to get an M5 because I grew up in Manhattan, and you know, nobody had cars like I mentioned earlier. You know, if you saw an S63, that was mind-blowing. You were like, that guy's cool. Right, that's mind-blowing. If you saw a Bentley or something like that, you were like, okay, that guy's really wealthy, right? If you saw an M5, you were like, that's somewhat, it feels attainable to me, you know, and it's a BMW, which was, you know, where my head was at. And so I ended up, that was kind of like my dream car. I ended up leasing a brand new M5 from Swap-A-Lease. It was an amazing long story. It's a really a fun time, and so now I have my kind of like German hot rod, you know, whatever it is, and and I'm keeping up with the Joneses literally and figuratively. And so that was kind of, for me, that was kind of like the beginning of my whole, chapter into the supercar world. And it's just funny how now I want you to tell your story about, you had the SECs, you had the first car, we had the 4 Series, whatever, the E36, a lot of crossover. But tell us about your Hammer story, because
so the Hammer story
this is like one of the greatest car stories of all time.
So that's an interesting one. I remember always reading about these cars and just kind of being enamored with them and figuring out, like going down this literal rabbit hole where, I mentioned briefly, and I have to shout out Jonathan Hodgman of Blue Ridge Mercedes. He's the shop that I worked at that owns the Hammer wagon and other notable kind of Mercedes hot rods as well. So after being exposed to the cars and being around them and hearing this thing, I was just like, it's so radical. We're talking solid lifters. You can hear the radical cam, and it's just nothing like you've ever heard before. It's a true muscle car in a luxury sedan. So I was just absolutely jaw dropping and enamored with them. And I remember talking about how can I find one of these things? So I was like, then reading one of the old Road and Track articles, and I was like, one of 13 ever made. I was like, yeah, good luck. There's 13 of them, and there's millions of cars out there. Well, what are my odds of even finding one of these things? But it's just through kind of tenacity I go through, and I started reading through forums, and there was a couple of cars that were bouncing around. There was a black car that was in New Hampshire, and then there was some forum posts about this guy in New York that happened to have one right in Freeport, like kind of in your backyard.
Yeah,
so
up the island, yeah.
So I was like, he had this famous video too, where he was talking about this opening line, said a lot of people think they own real AMG Hammers, and they don't, but I do. And it was this big character persona New York guy, this amazing gentleman that built his whole business from the ground up doing independent Mercedes repair. And the story was that one time this car showed up on eBay, and this is early days of eBay when you didn't have it on your phone, so you had to be stationary to bid. Wow. There was a car that popped up, and he got a phone call saying, hey, one of these AMG Hammers is on here. It was kind of a weird color. So he's like, you should bid on it. And the guy buys the car off the shelf for $8,000. So $8,000, and was missing its original engine. And he gets a phone call one day saying, hey, I have your original engine. He's like, what are you talking about? And the guy says, I didn't bid on it because I wasn't home and I forgot. But he sells him the engine for double the original price of the car. So going back, the engines were famously separated from the cars because they always blew up. They were not built really well. And it's still things that we're working with guys like Rentec and them to try to future-proof these cars and repair these, because they were prototype race cars made for the street. It was limited production stuff that didn't hold up.
They were just stuffing power into
whatever
these
they
things,
could do,
reaching the upper threshold of what was possible.
Right, and you didn't have the engineering might of Mercedes to go through with the quality, so they didn't last. They just built it, got it out the door, made the powers. It was pure hot rod.
Right.
It was pure hot rods. So the car blew up and the engine was separated and was lost to time. Then he gets a call saying, hey, I have your engine, and reunites it with the car.
Wow.
But he never actually
verified.
verified.
What a love story.
What a love story. Unfortunately, Hurricane Sandy hit, and the gentleman had 3 feet of seawater in his shop, and insurance gave him money. And then I called the guy, and I was
Didn't
like...
he keep the car up on a...
So he kept the car in the lift, and the car didn't get wet.
Did you have footage of this?
I don't have footage of this, but I have photos of the car at his shop.
Oh, you have photos, yeah.
I have photos of the car at the shop. And I remember watching the YouTube video, and I remember this very distinctively saying, watching the video in the drop-off lane at my community college, because I was in between jobs and didn't know what I wanted to do. And my friend says, yeah, you need to go save that car. It's jokingly. And I took that very literal in that moment and said, I will. And he was like, yeah, whatever, and just changed the song. And that's all I could think about was, how do I get to New York? How do I go see this? So I cold called the guy one day. I was like, hey, I'm interested. Actually, if you go into Bring a Trailer, you type in AMG Hammer and a Porsche 928. There was a listing where he kind of threw it on Craigslist about saying, hey, buy 2 for 1, get the 928 for $100,000, and then you get the AMG Hammer for free.
Wow, this is Bring a Trailer before it was an auction.
Before it was an auction site. It was just a blog post.
This is when it was a listing site, yeah.
So you can see them talking about this, and the comment section was kind of chatting it up and this and that. They're like, oh, this guy's crazy, he's out of his mind. And I was like, I just need to go look at this thing. The only one I've seen was in Atlanta, but I've never seen another one. There's only 13. So I call my buddy in Atlanta. He actually drives my car up that was getting serviced, and then we go and we take a road trip and drive to Manhattan overnight and go, and yeah, there it is right there. So there's famous pictures of the car in his shop, and there's some unique identifiers. So the more that I keep researching about the cars that really drew me to them is everyone is unique. because they were all coach built. And that's the thing we'll get to, is the uniqueness of these cars. You could spec them however you wanted, where you could choose the color, you could choose the wheels, you could choose the interior, the engine displacement. They were doing metal work, body modifications, and anything you want as long as you could pay for it. And to me, the individuality was such a draw. So we find out that the red car is up there, and then looking through, I was like, oh, I don't like red, it's too bright, it's this and that. Like, I'm more of a subtle car guy. And then took my buddy in Atlanta who came up and looked at it. We started looking at the car. It wasn't really on the table to buy it. It was just kind of like, go look at it and start chatting with them. We couldn't put a deal together because it wasn't really about that. It was just so enamored with this car that it even possibly existed, of just getting in front of it, I want to see it. I want to see it. It was just purely for the adventure.
Not to mention in this like bizarre setting of a shop where the guy selling a 920, and then there was this hurricane flood thing. I mean, it's a whole crazy story.
Whole crazy story. Yeah. So we go back and forth, and then I had to figure out, like, couldn't get it out of my head. I was like, I got to see if there's any way I can pull this off. I was like, there's no way, this is a dream, but I don't know where I'm going to get the money. I don't know how I'm going to do any of this. So we go, and I had my pictures and had spent the time and started talking with my parents. I was like, I'm working this minimum wage job. I'm, doing detailing cars on the side and just doing whatever I could to scrap together some cash. And my parents are like, this could be something interesting here. So we'll split whatever you can pull together. So finally called the guy back, and then the only reason why we were able to really put the deal together was it was going to another family. So he had a little kid growing up, but he needed the money for insurance. So that was one of the ways of back and forth of actually able to get that car, of just going there and just being genuine, of like, genuinely interested in the story of this car and putting it together. So once again, the car, some cool stories of picking the car up and going back, but finally get the car there and just driving it around a little bit. Then I was like, this thing's kind of special. So then I started doing some research on, like, hey, it was in the red AMG Hammer and just whatever. Then I see there's, it was in this magazine. Then it was in Car and Driver. Then it was in World's Fastest Cars and this, other photo shoot. And I started doing some more digging on this. And I was like, then I get another one, and it has the AMG catalog. I was like, well, it's the only red sedan because there's 13 of these other cars.
Right.
So going through it, trying to chase it down, and then the more that I keep digging, I was like, this car is special. Like, this one did everything. It was in this. It was in the Washington Post, and then it was there. Then one of the days I was just doing digging and just Googling random people's names. So it was this guy, the Richard Buxbaum, so a very unique name. And he was the CEO of the AMG at the time. And I Googled his name, and he's an antiques dealer in Chicago. And I just called him, and I was like, hey, do you remember this car? He's like, of course, this was, the red sedan. It did all these magazines, and we did everything with that car. So it's the more people that started talking to remembered that car. Then he said, hey, let me send you some old photos of the car. And it was photos from day one. I was like, this thing was so special that everyone documented any time of their interactions with this car. So still have it to this day. But the other thing where we'll get to is, what is the goal? So had the car, it has about 74,000 miles on it. It was running and driving, and only put a couple hundred miles on it, but I parked it because the more I started to realize it was special, and I was like, I'm a 19-year-old kid with this thing. Like, I'm gonna wrap it around a tree if I'm not careful.
Right,
so
right.
I kind of parked it to understand what to do, what the best course of action is with it. So that's kind of the next nature of it. And I remember we actually have a picture of it up here right now. The car's famous story was it was purchased by a gentleman by the name of A.B. Hudson out of Topeka, Kansas, of Hudson Oil. And
Hudson Oil.
Yes. So he owned that car, and some other famous guys in the Lambo world bought some other cars from his collection. And I always remember there was this like spot of like adhesive and glue on the dashboard that always bothered me. And I was like, like pick at it with your finger and whatever. I was like, how do I clean that off? And then I remember calling, Googling, working back on the forum post before the guy Steve that bought it. And it was a shop in Topeka that got the car. And they were trying to put a Mercedes 500E engine. I was like, I wonder if this phone number is still active. So I called him, and he's like, oh, yeah, that was, Hudson's car, this and that. He's like, does it still have the spot of glue on the dashboard? I'm like, yeah, what are you talking about? He's like, oh, he glued a radar detector when run up I-70 like 130 to 150 every day with that car.
No way.
So even something as little things like that were still people remembered to this day about that particular car.
So did the motor was reunited with the car?
So the original motor was reunited with the car. There's a famous photo of the car in Road and Track. When you look, it's the only car that actually had the engine number with red paint smeared in it that we've seen. So first thing I did when I went to go look at it, I bought a copy of the magazine and was able to verify the original engine was reunited with the car.
That's so cool. What a crazy story. And for what it's worth today, you know, to own a piece of history and for you to have that kind of natural passion that developed organically years and years before these cars caught kind of attention in the spotlight of collectors or enthusiasts or anything is such an amazing story and a testament to kind of what can happen if you're just genuinely passionate about something and you follow your interest, because that's exactly been my experience as well. Is just, you know, just a kid who liked cars and came down to Miami. And I mean, I used to pull up to Curated in my 4 Series, you know, back in 2016 or 17. I remember I would just get in my car and just go for drives because I never had a car growing up in New York City.
It was the experience of freedom.
It was the experience of freedom, exactly. So I would leave campus and hop on 95 and just pop off an exit that I thought had like a cool downward braking turn or something. Not a whole lot of corners in Miami. And to make a long story short, I remember the first time I pulled in here, pulled right up on the canopy, parked my car, got out, doors were open. There wasn't a whole lot of cars in the showroom, and there was a blue, dark blue, non-metallic BMW M1, BMW M1 in the corner of the showroom, right down there. And I walk in and I'm just like drooling. I can't believe that I'm seeing one of these things. Kind of like how you felt about the Hammer. And it wasn't necessarily a car that I was super passionate about, but it was like this mystical thing that you could only see on Google Images.
Right, exactly.
Which was always my relation to any cool car was Google Images, right? Like, I remember in computer class when I was in like 3rd grade, I don't know, 5th grade or something. Somebody made like, we had a competition, me and the kids sitting a few seats down, who had a cooler computer background. You know, because like setting the desktop picture and the computer teacher getting mad at you and how long could you have it up for was like the thing to do in computer class, right? Of course. And so he put up, I think I had like an SLR.
Nice. And
I was like, this is the coolest car. Mercedes and McLaren came together. Like, this is a collab of the century. The doors go up, right? All these things.
I remember my dad forcing my dad to take me to the dealer when we heard that there was an SLR. Then I still have like little, 4x5, pictures. And I brought my 18th scale model with me, put it in front of the car, in the picture in front of it. That car was mind blowing.
That's amazing. So anyway, I was like, the SLR is the car, just like kind of how you felt about it. And I made it my background, and this kid next to me puts up like a rear shot of like a Zonda F or something.
Oh, yeah.
With like, the
center
quad
exhaust.
pipes. And I was like, okay, shit. Like,
you win.
You win. Like, I didn't even know what that car was, right? So for me to be working at a Pagani dealer years later and to have all that up-close experience with all those cars was super, super cool for me. And I need to mention also that with that genuine passion, like, this M5 at the time for me was the most unjustifiable financial decision one could make. I had minimal to no income. I was not in college. My parents were supporting my rent at the time and just ready to cut me off completely. And I go and lease a $100,000 plus car.
Perfect.
My dad co-signed the credit. I still don't know how BMW Financial approved me for the lease. And it was literally down to the penny to afford gas, to own this car. Like,
couldn't get guac at Chipotle.
I could not afford guac at Chipotle. I was fasting. I was so skinny. I was driving around this M5. I mean, I was so happy, man. It was such a cool thing for me to be able to keep up with my clients and also that I had a car where everybody could come share the experience with me because the Urus wasn't out yet, right? So you're working at a Lambo dealer. You're keeping up with all the Lambos, but you could fit a couple other employees or friends in the back seat. So that was just an awesome thing for me and kind of a full circle moment. But, with that being said, I think we both have deep passion and appreciation for how far we've come.
Right.
And I think, in tandem with that, the collector car market has grown as we've grown. I think social media has played a huge role in that. I think kind of, the computer, and John calls it the video game generation, but I'll just call it kids from the age of information, growing up with access to information, to come into age and not just get a license, but, come into the real world as a working young adult and, try to make a couple bucks to be able to one day afford your car as being like the aspiring kind of like, vision board goal that we all have, right? So for you and me to kind of hit that in crazy ways early on in our lives, it's also given us so much room to continue to aspire.
Of course.
To say, well, what's the next thing going to be that checks those boxes for us, and also for the collector community. And I think, Curated's obviously carved out better than most any other, in my opinion. I mean, obviously a little bit biased, but and then any other kind of supercar dealer, I would say, in North America, is that they've always been, and John particularly has always been, Herschel as well, ahead of the curve, right? And he's always kind of anticipated that, when our generation, so to speak, would come into their own and be able to kind of afford these cars eventually, that, it would create an uptick in the rise, and kind of how the previous generation's always looking at the next one, to see what kind of things they like. And so I think part of what's given you and I such an amazing kind of perspective and platform to help our clients is our own interest, right? So
no, it's authentic.
Yeah, it's that genuine passion and stuff. So for me, like growing up, I just appreciated cars in general. If I went to the New York Auto Show, I got to sit in a Porsche Boxster. I was excited.
Yeah, right.
I didn't care what it was. Nowadays we kind of laugh at those cars, but they do make some really good drivers. I think it's the 9.8. I don't know.
Yeah, the 9.7, the 718 or whatever.
No,
it is.
the older ones, super analog. Anyways.
Oh yeah, the Gen 1 stuff.
The Gen 1 stuff, right? They're awesome.
So much value.
Yeah, enthusiast drivers' cars and stuff like that. But to be in a position where we're selling like Carrera GTs and Ford GTs and SLRs and manual Murcielagos and Bugatti Veyrons and all these cars that when we were young were like the kind of final form of what we were able to produce from raw materials from the earth. It's just it's an amazing opportunity that we have, and it's
incredibly
super cool. Yeah.
So I think touching on the video game stuff, there was certain cars, like I played racing games growing up, genuinely. One game, the first one I remember was Need for Speed Most Wanted 2. There was a cool thing. They had a Lamborghini Diablo 6.0 police car, and then they had the cover image art is incredible. Then the other one that they had, I think we're pulling up the cover. No, I'm sorry. Hot Pursuit 2, not Most Wanted. I'm sorry. Yeah, Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2. They had the Diablo 6.0, and it's actually a game that I recently replayed, which was a lot of fun. So yeah, on the cover was the Murcielago, the Gen 1 in the launch color yellow, and that was one of the first cars. But the top car was the McLaren F1 LM, and that was a car that really stuck with me, I would say. We've got
a good story we could share about that.
We're going to talk about a full circle.
Yeah.
So that was a game that kind of really I remember playing with for many, many years. And then even today they did this NFS edition. So like it was like the tuner version. I was like, wait, you can take cars, but you can make them better. Like to me, that was a mind-blowing concept.
So I have to interrupt you. So full disclosure, I'm confessing right now in front of the world here, our little car world. I did not grow up playing a ton of racing games. I grew up because cars were so out of the realm of thought for my environment at the time. I grew up playing Halo and shooting games and stuff like that. So I didn't grow up playing racing games. I didn't get into Forza till, 2014 or something, admittedly, maybe a little earlier.
So I've got a good Forza story too.
Yeah, and so for me, like, I must have seen, I think arcade games were like the time.
Yeah, or David Buster's or something.
Yeah, it was stuff like that, exactly. But so for me, I remember once you pulled up that Need for Speed logo with that yellow Mercy, the first Mercy I ever saw up close that I can remember was actually a yellow Murcielago when I worked at Prestige. Full story come around, full circle, long story short, it was the car that originally was a Ronald McDonald spec. It was yellow with red interior, and it was owned by a drug dealer or something of that nature, a music producer, something like that.
So incorrectly is known as the Dead Rapper Mercy.
The Dead Rapper Mercy was the first yellow Mercy, was the first Mercy I ever laid eyes on. I actually took a photo in that car and didn't know that it was the Dead Rapper Mercy.
That was like cursed with this incredible story. The most
cursed Mercy of all time was the first one I laid my eyes on. You just reminded me of that when you pulled that up. But back to the F1 LM. So this is what, Need for Speed?
This is Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2.
Okay.
This car had such an impact on me when I remember my mom had this friend and she painted these amazing murals. I actually have a life-size hand-painted mural, 30 feet diagonal of an F1 LM front three-quarter shot. That car had such an impact on me.
In where?
In my bedroom. Everything I would see when I would go to bed. I just remember the statistics.
That's so funny.
It was 0 to 100 to 0 in 10 seconds flat, and it held that record for like 20 years. And I remember going through McLaren when they were a small company, they had these sound clips of these cars and they would post the gear ratios of each car. And you could see actually conversations with some of the engineers back and forth talking about all the statistics of this car and anything I could see, even to just read anything about these cars, because you couldn't see them. The information wasn't there. You couldn't just take a picture and upload it. So these cars were mythical. They were unicorns in everything. They had this presence to them. And to this one, I was like, this is the ultimate. And for me, I was always the car that captivated me just from that. And then moving forward, that was the one.
So ironically, this is so funny. I don't know if we've never had this conversation, but when I was in the second grade, we had like a student fair or something, and your parents would come, and maybe there was like a school play going on or something, and they'd come watch that. I don't really remember. It was second grade, but my dad entered a raffle, and I think he spent like $100 on tickets, which was like a baller move at the time to do in this little school fair raffle. And we won a Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Roadster FAO Schwartz pedal car. And my dad carried it home. It was big enough for him to carry. It was big enough for me to ride in it as a second grader, pedal it with my feet. And when we ended up moving years later, he mounted it on my wall. So you have an amazing supercar with a BMW powertrain on your
and then
wall,
you have the Mercedes supercar of the first generation, the world's first supercar.
Which is so funny.
That's funny.
I actually got the chance to meet my kind of hero wall car.
Right.
When I was super fortunate to spend some time with the folks at RM Sotheby's and my buddy Matt Malamud over there. We went up to go see the RM Sotheby's location in Chatham, which is a small town in rural Canada. And we got to hang out with Rob Myers, who's the RM in RM Sotheby's. Amazing dude, love you, Rob. And sometimes. And and he was so cool. I told him my story. He threw me the keys to his 300 SL Roadster, and I got to just drive around in free roam, free play,
in a
video game, in my kind of like poster car as a kid. And to tie that into your F1 LM story, we were at the Quail. No, sorry,
Pebble.
we were
on the lawn at Pebble.
On the lawn at Pebble, Sunday morning. This was not this past year with the Low Tech, where we won an award, which is so cool to talk about, but the year before. And our buddies over out of Chicago, Mouse Motors, ended up showing their F1 LM.
So that is chassis number 2.
Chassis number 2.
So that particular car, when that car came into the country in 2016, it was spotted at a warehouse in Baltimore. Nobody knew what it was, and we figured out that it was the it was the Federalizer. So bringing these cars in is very difficult if they weren't originally destined for the U.S. And a friend of mine.
And you lived in D.C.
I lived in D.C.
So not far away from Baltimore.
Like for me, my head was my dome was blown.
Your head was exploded.
My head was exploded.
Right. Yeah.
So for me, one of my friends figured out who the guy that owned that company was, cold called him, made up some story that, hey, we used to race together. I heard you have this car here. Can we come see it? And these people are very off the grid. But unfortunately, I had another scheduling conflict, and he didn't tell me what the surprise was. So he kind of held this over me of hey, this is what I had.
So he went and you didn't show up?
No, so he planned this whole thing, but I was like, hey, I've got this other thing, and he didn't tell me what the surprise was.
He made up a lie and conjured up
to try to get me to go there, but we couldn't go. So I didn't know, so then he tells me this. Then we find out it's on display at McLaren Philadelphia. So we drove back and forth 3 times just to see this car static in the showroom.
That you had a mural of on your wall.
That I had a mural on the wall to see that exact car. So then, going back to your story, at Pebble Beach, the same car is there.
So this same car is there. It's being shown. And I've got some relationship. I've got a great relationship with the owner, which I'm extremely fortunate to have. They're an amazing organization, and they have an amazing private collection. And I was shocked that they brought this car out, because this is like the holy grail.
This is the holy grail for us. So we'll come back to that.
Yeah, I mean, not to mention that it's got a BMW powertrain. Thank you, Gordon Murray, for doing that for me. I appreciate it. But, it was so cool to see the car out there on the lawn. I'm sure it won an award. I remember. I know that their other race car won an award. And this is
so that car was shown at Quail. It won at Quail one year, but I think it wasn't. It didn't go on the tour, and it was just kind of their display only in the celebration.
Right. And I actually remember
McLaren
seeing
F1.
it at the Quail, which was the first time I actually met those folks, which was super cool.
Yeah, they're on the lawn.
And so I end up, Stephen, me, your father, and Sean were hanging out.
Yep.
We were just under a tree catching some shade after being in the sun all weekend. And we were just talking, and you told me you had this mural on your wall, and I was like, we got to go over to the car. And you were like, well, what do you mean? And what do you mean we're going to go over to the car? That we can't go near that unicorn.
Right.
Like it's, God forbid we disrupted its aura or something. And so we ended up walking over, and I somehow got Steven to sit in the car, which was super cool.
I mean, my background is still
his
the LM steering wheel.
Phone is still the steering wheel.
The steering wheel to that
I got a great
car.
photo of Steven sitting in the car. That photo, I believe, is Zach Braille or Spencer Modes or one of my buddies. But that's a really cool
Larry.
story. Was that Larry Winning Auto?
Yeah, that's Winning Auto.
Yeah,
Larry.
shout out Larry. So this is a crazy story, and I am just grateful that I can even tell the story, because who am I, right? But just a kid who loves cars. And so I was, after the entire day, the sun was setting, and I was ready to leave, and I ran into some car spotter friends of mine. I know John mentioned car spotters. This is your moment, guys. And I ended up running into them, and it was one of their birthdays, and they're just such nice kids. And I said to them, I said, what are you guys hanging around here for? Like, I'm ready to leave. And they were like, well, we're waiting for that.
Yeah, they always wait for motion. So at Car Spotters, it's before and after the events is when they,
Right,
so they
that's
always,
when the cars go in and out.
That's when they're going in and out.
Right, so I figured, oh man, these guys are sitting around waiting, like there's nothing going on. There's, the day's winding down, and everyone's sunburned, like we've been in the sun all day long. And they're like, we're waiting for the F1 LM. I said, well, what are you waiting for? They're waiting for it to move. I said, do you want me to just go ask
Yeah, exactly.
the guys if we can move the car for a photo shoot? And everyone looked at me like I had three heads. They were like, what do you mean? You're just going to walk over?
It's like the prettiest
and
girl
ask
at the
them?
dance. You can't ask her out.
Right, yeah.
And instead, nobody was doing anything, and she was sitting there alone.
Exactly. So I was just kind of hoping that I could make this moment come true for all these car spotters. And so I went over and asked, and the folks were super kind. They're like, yeah, of course, let's move it. And they got it rolling, and we positioned it. And I have a video of like, I think 35 car photographers sprinting and hunched over each other, taking this epic photo. And there ended up being some really great shots. So that was like an amazing moment for me to be a part of, because to be able to do that for you, and then for all these car spotters, I'm like, who am I? How did I get so lucky? And then of course I think it's because it's got a BMW motor, and my heart just drew it. My heart just drew it to us.
So good.
So that was really cool. But I think that the perfect pivot off of that is, obviously that's the icon of a generation of the 90s for us.
Yep.
Regardless of where your passion lies, that is the best road car that was made in
without
the 90s.
a doubt. And that was what's cool.
It says
about
a lot
that
going
car.
up against F50s and all kinds of other amazing cars, but that's the peak of what we could have made with raw materials out of the earth at the time.
So even then, like the attention to detail, and we go back to kind of, for me, it's details with cars and cool stories. Like there's a great story, and no matter, the more you keep reading about, there's been books written about this car and the McLaren F1 alone, not just the LM, where there was stories about Gordon Murray describing, like in an engineering meeting, they said, how's it going to sound when it starts? And Gordon Murray makes a sound, and then he says, needs to like it describes the sound. And then the engineers go, okay, so it needs to like do 3 revolution, catch on this cylinder, and then fire. So even to the starting sequence, sound was engineered. And then when looking at the magnets for the CD transfer in the CD player, they were made of, normal magnets are made out of iron. They took aluminum and sprayed them with iron filings just to save every ounce of weight that they could. So to that detail, and then to have the ultimate version to celebrate their victory at Le Mans, to me, it's just, that's why that car is the halo. But going back to kind of some of my experience with video games, this is actually a story that I've never shared anywhere. So my SEC, going back, is one of the cars I learned to drive, and drive spiritedly. And
I actually learned how to drive in a Mercedes as well.
There you go.
I'm ashamed to admit what kind, but I learned how to drive in New York City traffic, cutting off taxi cabs in Mercedes.
Exactly. So with one of the video games, Forza, one of the best parts about that game was going through and understanding upgrading of cars and how it affects the balance of handling and performance with that car. So you could do motor swaps, you could do race suspension.
You can put a little splitter.
You can do that, add downforce on there, but then you could go and you can tune them. You can say, hey, let me dial in some camber, gear ratio, camber, tire pressures, the whole thing.
Right.
So
I never got that deep.
All of that. So I spent hours, building drift cars, adjusting this, and doing class and spec racing. There's a group of guys that I played with, and we competitively raced. And one of my friends was like on this mythical thing called Mount Fujimi Kaido, and he had a Hummer H1, and he was the 5th fastest person down the hill in a Hummer H1, which was incredible.
He modded it, he tweaked all
He modified everything. So going back to what these games represent was, I remember driving my SEC, and this was before the era of traction control and electronic aids and everything. So one of the things that they didn't have was they had a locking differential instead of traction control. So there was it's a cool highway in DC. It was an uphill left-hand merge. So I was driving my SEC. It was wet out, and I go and merging it. I was just going third, and I expected the car to go to second gear. It goes to first gear. My foot's all the way down. The whole back kicks out, and there's a cliff there. Never been fast in a car at all.
Code Brown moment.
Instinctively mat the pedal and threw the wheel, full counter steer. I'd never done anything, but because of the hours I played
in Forza,
I just knew how to react with that car and caught it, swung it back the other way, and it was dead side that my friend and I started cheering.
I've been on the go-kart track with you. If you weren't a very talented go-kart driver, I'd be laughing at you right now, but I believe you.
No,
I believe
of
you.
course.
I believe that this translated over from Forza to real life to go-karting. I've seen it happen.
It's happened.
He's not one of those guys. He's very quick around a circuit. We've got some great stories of going karting together, and yeah, Steven just shows up and there's people that were there all day practicing. Steven comes out,
damn, I'm a half second slow today.
Yeah, he's 5 seconds faster than everybody.
But it's going back to that was some of the exposure that we had, and then the friendships that we had with that. Like, there's another story with a friend of mine that when he would spend hours in iTuning, and we would always race together. And he actually just won his class in SCCA Nationals in autocross.
Oh, wow.
And this was his exposure, was with those games and going through, because he loved the experience of racing and getting into that and doing the battles and things like that as well. So that was his exposure to those games, where I think that was like the hours, the nights, the sleepless times, always whatever you could do to build it and battle it.
It also gave you an idea. I love how I refuse to talk about video games and cars, and here we are.
We're back.
Yeah, we're super deep in it now. Now it's all coming out. And what's so funny is, like, I used to be able. I mean, look, when you're talking about cars with guys and you've got high octane and testosterone, people always want to know more than the guy next to them, right? And so what people always do is they'll take a stance on a car and they'll stack it up against the other car.
Exactly.
And they'll say, this car's better than that car, and I know more than you, and da-da-da-da-da. And so the cool thing about Forza was everything had a number and metrics. Right. So you could literally see how the video game algorithm or the producers of the game or whatever would stack up, this versus that.
The balance of power.
One car that always stuck out to me was like the Ford RS200 Evo. How it was like the fastest thing, the power to weight ratio. And so when I first got to have an opportunity to sell one of those cars, I was so excited because I knew in Forza how tremendously like above par that car was
versus whatever it was.
Yeah, and versus what it looked like and stuff too. And anyways, but
so I think that's also another thing of like what cars were impactful. Like I remember, so I'm very grateful to work in sales here at Curated, and I remember one gentleman was like, find me the cover car, the Diablo SV on the cover. And that was a lot of people, like my father's generation, had Farrah Fawcett with Cannonball Run, and they had these other cars in their posters that really impacted with them. What was different about us is, at least with this, is you could play with it. You could get in it. You could go in the cockpit view. You could see how it exploded, and you can do all that.
Right. That was always I always drove in center cockpit.
You have to.
Forza, yeah.
So I think that was a fun thing. But the next thing I think that we wanted to talk about, where at least we have some reference with this, is what are the cars in different price points that stick out to you, and how have you seen young collectors and people getting into the hobby? How have you seen things change? And I guess let's start off like we'll start with cars under 60 grand. What you like? Well,
look, we're both old souls from a car perspective.
Yep.
I think the reason for that is just because we grew up right at the shift where everything. Well, at least me. You're a couple years older than me, but we grew up right at the shift where things shifted from being super analog to having all this modern technology and computer software and da-da-da-da-da. And so we always kind of looked back on the analog era with a kind of reverence for a period that no longer was going to be carried over.
Right.
And we kind of, as we got older, we got farther and farther away from that. And so it just kind of makes you long for stuff that you didn't get to experience at the same time, right? So a lot of these cars that I'm into are from the year I was born or earlier.
Right.
Just because it was kind of like, the part of life that I missed out on by coming into this earth at that point in time, right?
Exactly.
So it's kind of, I'm a similar way with music. Like I also like to explore music genres that are from before my time. So I'm a huge, Grateful Dead fan and stuff like that. Meanwhile, the band was pretty much disavowed by the time I was born.
Right.
So, we're both unique from that perspective. And I think a lot of the viewers probably share a lot of those same sentiments. I'm not saying we're unique, but I'm saying more more so than that's not the average call it person of our age that isn't just a general. If we took somebody out of the general population, they wouldn't feel that way. They'd probably prefer to drive around in their modern Range Rover or whatever because it's comfortable and luxurious and Maybachs and all
your
that
phone
kind of
connects
stuff.
and all
your
the
Bluetooth
convenience.
works and all those things. And don't get me wrong, I love all that stuff about cars, and I worked in that segment of the industry for a while. But over time, I just kind of started to appreciate the quirkier and kind of more oddball stuff. And since then, I've gotten to play with a bunch of really cool stuff, just like you. But back to your point, for 60 grand or less, I mean, everyone knows my answer is going to be the E36 M3. I own a bunch of them. I think that they're awesome. It was my first car that I actually had the title of. So no surprise there. I think if a BMW 1M was 10 grand cheaper, it'd fall under that category. Yep. Steven actually sold me one a few weeks ago. Yep. Greatest little car ever.
Because it's a return to form.
Yeah, it's basically a modern, more modernized E36, which it's still analog, but I mean, I'm lucky enough to have both, so I kind of appreciate them for different reasons. But the 1M is kind of a really awesome point in time for BMW. What else? Mini Coopers, manual Mini Coopers, John Cooper Works cars.
JCWs.
So much fun.
GP1, GP2s.
Yeah, I like the R53s, the supercharged ones. SL600.
God, remember what was that movie? The Italian Job, when those came out.
Yep.
So fun thing about The Italian Job, it was such a low budget film that all the actors were actually doing all the stunt driving. So they did not hire stunt drivers.
Yeah, I would have liked to be
and I remember when that movie came out, it's like having those Mini Coopers, they were just the coolest things in the world. Like driving through the subway, then with the sounds of the superchargers and all the clips.
Yeah, and you can mod them. I mean, they're essentially part BMW too, which I guess is why I like them. But SL600 is another one for me.
Great car.
Our SL500 R129 chassis. I like R107s too. They're appreciating in price. I think my dad met my mom in one. Like I think my dad borrowed his boss's R107 to take my mom on their first date. So I have a super interesting nostalgia collection of that connection.
We've seen there was one car that actually did a really strong number at Pebble Beach in like $250,000, and these cars are like $8,000 cars. So for the longest time, the one to have in my opinion is the 500 SL, like an '86. So like the later cars, the European cars.
Yeah,
you get almost like 300 horse, higher compression, and you get the headers. It's the more desirable bumpers, but they're really fantastic cars, and just that old school Mercedes build quality, with design cues like the front grille that date back to the 300 SL.
One car I'd like to own, obviously, again going back to BMW, is the E60 M5 with a 6-speed. That's on my list of stuff. I know a lot of the guys here would agree with me. Williams Formula One technology in a sedan, and again,
and the V10 era when they were supposed to race in Formula One.
And you can have all your buddies in the car to enjoy the sound. Whereas if you took out a Murcielago, you only get one girl, which is awesome. But your homies want to come home for the ride too, sometimes. So that's a cool car that's on my list, definitely.
So what is your opinion on investment grade cars versus driver spec cars? So like for example, like an E60, there's a famous BMW dealer, EAG. There was where they kind of build the mold.
I know exactly where you're going with this. I'm oftentimes torn because it just depends on what the car. Like so, for example, for a BMW. And we're going to move on from BMWs after this, I promise, guys. But, from a BMW's perspective, the cars are meant to be driven to smithereens. That's what they're there for. Right. It's the ultimate driving machine. But honestly, for the price point of what it is, there's no reason not to drive the piss out of it.
They were so good.
And they're so good to drive. So, do I want a collector grade, no rock chips example that I'm going to go destroy? Like, not really. Do I want a car that isn't going to give me problems and be in the shop all the time? So it's a BMW. Good luck. I mean, you got to get really lucky with picking your poison on that one. But so for me, if it's a good spec and it's been maintained, it hasn't been hit, that to me is more important than anything else.
I think there's a sweet spot with mileage where there's a usable mileage. I like kind of like 30, you're getting low, so kind of like 30 to 70K.
Yeah, you can't go wrong.
It's fresh enough.
You can't go wrong. I mean, hopefully it's been well serviced and refreshed and stuff like that. But anyways, that's it for BMWs for today. Let's move on to something more exciting, more curated, I would say. So, although John did sell a Dynan E39 M5 years and years ago.
He did.
That was an awesome
It was black
car.
too.
It was. I think it was carbon black. It was really cool. I would say moving on, 250 to 500. Something in that range, that I've always appreciated was manual F430s.
Yep.
I think they're great. I think that's kind of the last of an era of a reliable analog Ferrari. 05, 06 Ford GTs, I
So
think
good.
are criminally undervalued. I'll never forget the first time I drove one. I think that those cars are iconic for a multitude of reasons.
So you had with the Ford GT, you had two camps: guys that parked them and guys that drove them. And there's kind of is some in between, but there's guys that recognize they were special and they put them away. There's a lot of cars there that are coming to light with no mileage, but then there's also the same juxtaposition where you can get whatever color you want with whatever mileage you want too.
I agree. I think 5,000 to 12,000 miles to drive, below 5 to collect. I mean, I've sold cars as low as 3.5 miles from new that were in the wrapper. Obviously, you can't do much with it except stare at it and tell stories, which is always fun. But me personally, I'd like to be able to drive something that I'd spend that kind of money on. But again, it's all relative. It's all perspective based. Manual Murcielagos are escaping the $500,000 mark nowadays, but those obviously applied. You've got cars like, let's see, Steve, where's your head at? What comes up to mind with you?
So
I know you like the manual Gallardos.
So we'll get to that, but in the there's a car that I think everyone in this building is tired of me talking about. It is the 2015 Camaro Z28, and I think that car is criminally underrated. When you start researching what they did to try to make that car special, I had to. So there's a really cool car that I know of that checks all the boxes. There's a car here that I know of that is.
We went to go look at one once, didn't we?
We did
at a CarMax.
No. It was
or a Chevy dealer.
It was a Chevy dealer in Coral Gables.
No, it was like South Miami.
South Miami was beat. It was completely beat. So
it was so beat. I've never seen a more beat car.
So there's lots of great technology that went into these cars. A friend of mine that has one, and when they said to engineer this car, they said put the Camaro on a diet. They did thinner rear glass. They did no trunk liners. They actually they eliminated the HID headlights to halogens.
Is it dry? It's got a dry sump?
So that's with the LS7. So then they took the LS7 out of the Z06 Corvette and then found its way into that car. They made under, I think, 2,000 cars. But so many cool details that went into 315 square tires, Pirelli Trofeo Rs, carbon ceramics. They went to Multimatic, which did the same shocks on the Aston Martin 177 on this car. It makes 505 NA horsepower. The downforce package that was added where they did whatever they could to make it as track focused as possible. And for me, it was like, this is the biggest engine they could. And once again, in their pony car, you had Recaro seats, you had optional air conditioning, you had optional radio. So whatever they could to make it really as thin as they could. They even cut out the Chevy bow tie, and they called it the flow tie.
How do you not own one of these yet? Is
I've
what I was
tried.
my only question.
So,
How do you not own? Hold on, I got to cut you off real quick because if that car was yellow and it was Bumblebee spec,
it would be
I could
sold.
understand the fascination. Because growing up, for me, part of the reason that I'm into cars is Transformers, right? So when you talk about this car, I can't help but think Bumblebee. If it was yellow, I get it.
Yep.
Any other color, unfortunately, I don't care how good it is. It's not for Gabe. But in the Bumblebee spec, I completely understand the fascination with it. Does this thing have like a Nürburgring lap time or anything?
Yeah, I forget what it did on the ring.
There's a picture of it on the
Kevin,
ring.
what did it do on the ring? What was the ring time, and what was that comparable to?
737.
So we're at a 737 on the ring and where does that kind of place in the sevens?
I mean, it's what was that, 2015 or 14?
Yeah, 2015 with 505
pretty solid,
NA horsepower.
especially for an American car.
Right. So, but I mean, stick, rear-wheel drive,
Don't hate
Recaro
me.
seats, 7-liter. It's a package that can't be replicated again today. So sure, you still have the shortcomings of the Camaro interiors, but it's when you look at what was in there and what you got for that kind of package, to me is incredible. Like there's one car that checks all the boxes of kind of that curated model in that price point where it's VIN number 2. It was the press car. It's the last of the line. They know they can't make this again. So for me, I think that those cars and finding the good examples, the investment grade cars, I think, so it's, right there with, it was quicker.
The Z06 was 5 seconds slower.
Yeah, the Z06 Corvette was 5 seconds slower than that car.
Wow,
So
okay.
their top car. So
Hey.
there's a lot of performance to be had with that car. The other cars that I like, being an AMG guy, at least in the modern thing, is the C63, kind of the 507 package cars.
I love a black series.
Well, not you don't need to be the black series because you got to be under that 50 grand of like, what do you buy?
Sorry.
So the C63, the 507 series, which got the SLS internals, some different hood and other treatments on the kind of the C-Class package. So always a 156 fan. So love that engine that AMG made that went on to go live in.
That's a good looking car.
Yeah, they were fantastic.
That's a beautiful car.
So the lines were great. Small
those
car.
Should be more. What do those sell for? 45 to 65 grand?
Yeah, I'd say around there.
I mean, that's a sick car. I mean, when I was in high school, I believe, maybe a little earlier, that was like the car, right?
That was the car.
That made the most noise. That was the fastest. It smoked tires.
Yep.
Cooper sedan didn't matter. They were both badass.
There was a kid in my high school that had a black one, and it's just like
that 507 and that spec that's on the screen right now. That's really special.
There's a Matt. For those that can't see, it's a Matt Gray Desenio car.
Yeah.
But it's that engine went on to live in the SLS, where that 156 was actually developed first as the race engine. So it was developed as the 159, and then it was homologated for the street engine. So it's another example of large displacement working back from motorsports. And to me, that's the direct lineage with the AMG Hammers.
So got it. So back to 250, SLS is one of my cars that's on the board. I think SLS's, F12s, stuff from kind of that 2011 to 2015 range is kind of like the last of the stuff that I'm super duper excited about that isn't a hypercar. SLS Black Series, obviously, the GTs, the Final Series, all those kinds of cool renditions. A plain SLS to me in a cool spec is, hey, Herschel, how's it going? Hey. Oh, we could have put the low tech here.
Yeah, we should have put.
Yeah.
And thank God we could edit that. Definitely edit that.
No, here, just do a panning shot in the background.
We're not editing that.
Yeah, just do a panning.
We're not editing that. Let's stay in it.
No, the SLS is such a great car where it does have that. Where it was AMG's first ground up car too.
Yeah.
You had the transaxle, and that's one of the things that were a lot of times where guys are holding certain cars back. It's like, oh well, what did this engine go on to use? I was like, no, that's the only car you could get that 159 in. So it is truly one of the things where I think where that car is going to hold up is because you can't just motor swap it. So the issue is with the 159 compared to the 156 is there's no starter. Because it's a transaxle car, the starter's on the transaxle, not on the block. So they can't swap it easily, and then you have C63s with SLS engines. So the closest that you could get to that was the 507 package.
Interesting.
The P30
That's really
cars.
cool. Yeah, so those are definitely undervalued.
Right, those are undervalued.
If that car had a stick, how cool of a car would it be?
See, I don't mind it with the dual clutch.
No, I like it, but I'm just saying, how cool would that be?
It'd be such
a unique offering.
It'd be a unique car.
The gull-wing doors and everything. I mean, there's not a lot of cars that have this kind of icon. I remember when I was much younger, a buddy of mine in high school stole his dad's SLS, and I was in the back seat of my friend's mom Maserati Gran Turismo convertible. It was brown. I just remember that, and we raced, and we ran the SLS off the road. I think it dropped a tire or something into a ditch, and luckily everybody was fine. The car was fine. But
that's another great car under 50 grand is the Maserati Gran Turismo.
These were iconic when we were younger.
God, when they came out.
Unfortunately, they don't hold up very well value-wise or quality-wise in terms of construction. And, the motor's a swan song, but the rest of the car is pretty much a Chrysler, in my opinion.
So it's like the E60 M5. The motor's incredible, but all your other touch points leave a little bit to be desired.
So we've covered all the kind of, I guess, lower-end stuff. We've hit some 250s.
So there's
to
a couple
500s.
other cars I want to highlight in the 250 range. Gallardo 50th Anniversario. We've had one came through and had 1,000 miles on it, and you drove it, and you were like, "This thing's a baby Carrera GT."
Yeah.
But that was it. We really didn't get a lot of time with
it.
So then we got another car that we had in Pebble Beach, and man, I fell in love with. Like everyone knows, I fell in love with that car. Where this is another car that is still criminally underrated.
Yeah, you and Herschel both feel the same about this.
Well, this car's so
I love these.
criminally
I think
underrated.
I sold that last Performante Spider that we had, and when the customer who took delivery of it spoke to the previous owner, who's a client of mine, I put them together just to chat about the car, and they've been buddies for a while now. The first thing he asked me, he goes, "Why the heck do you even sell this thing?" And I was like, "I know." And so, anyways, these LP Gallardos are tremendous value, tremendous drivers' cars, and also, I mean, they're they're collectible, and they're still a Lamborghini. They're still naturally aspirated. They're analog. They look good. Everything works. There's really no downfalls in terms of service or mechanical related items. There's not really many Achilles heels. I mean, these cars have a lot going for them. German-Italian, the kind of best little hybrid of the two. So you get the styling and the sound, but you have all the reliability. I mean, great cars for the money.
So I think there's a couple things.
I'd probably have one of these over a manual F430 if I had to be honest.
Oh, without a doubt.
Yeah, that's just my opinion. The manual F430s, I think, are more widely appreciated, but I think these are almost as rare, if not more rare in some capacities, not just the 50th anniversaries, but some of the other variants. They're awesome cars. Like baby Carrera GT is how I felt about
100%.
the 50th anniversary rear-wheel drive cars. The suspension's amazing. The feel is amazing. Everything works. There's no kind of real caveats of like, I mean, a Carrera GT is a real supercar. The clutch and everything. Of
course.
This your sister could drive if she knew how to drive
100%.
stick. Your little sister, but
so I think there's a few things I want to talk about. There was a famous guy, God rest his soul now. I don't know if you ever came across his videos, but his name was Robert Himmler. He made the twin turbo Gallardos famous, where he had a Verde Ithaca car. Gavin, I don't know if you can pull it up here. Robert Himmler, scares his mom in this video of him driving like a 1,200 horsepower UGR car around, and that was one of the cars that I remember growing up and just watching that. Where shooting flames, and then there was a famous video. Yeah, would shoot. Go back real quick. There you go. So there was super cool video of him. Yeah, here, Gavin, pull that one up.
That's real?
Yeah, that was real. So they would used to shoot these like fire rings out, and just hearing the sound of turbos with a Gallardo was just incredible. And there was another famous YouTuber that's been building a Gallardo with a twin turbo Gallardo. Stradman, and he's been trying to have this just because of what an impact these cars had on kind of my generation of people. So then you take the Gallardo Anniversario, where the 5-liter cars, although they're cheap and attainable, the 5.2-liter, it doesn't quite sound as cool because they changed the firing order, but they're a lot more reliable. They don't blow up as much. You got better build quality. And then with the Anniversario cars, this is kind of the engineer's car, where they converted it from all-wheel drive to rear-wheel drive. They put the lightweight wheels so it accelerates a little bit quicker. They put the bucket seats in that you needed, and they made it a driver spec car in this beautiful Bianco Apollos car, and only made 100 cars for the world. For me, it's the best example of a fantastic car, and they made 15,000 Gallardos, but there's only so many nice ones left. Like a lot of these cars got beat, they got cheap, they got used, and that's going back to finding the best examples of the best cars. And to me, that's a car's criminally underrated. So much I was trying to put my hand up for it, but couldn't quite pull it off.
We've been giving a lot of spotlight to these things. I hope that everyone doesn't go just buy them up so we can't play with them anymore. But
one more car that I think deserves some spotlight, but it's to the same thing, is the 550 Maranello WSR car. So
that's a cool car.
So the world speed record car, a car that not many people know exists. It was built to kind of commemorate the record of the top speed that the 550 Maranello achieved, where it came with leather-wrapped roll cage, different the carbon seats, in a 550 Maranello, which was supposed to be their GT car. So you're telling me that a Ferrari comes with a leather-wrapped roll cage and bucket seats to go as fast as possible? I've always been kind of a fan of kind of like of tuner cars, completely. And this is Ferrari's in-house tuner car, to which they only made 30 examples, and the cars were, in comparison to the 355s, which were notoriously difficult and expensive to maintain, these cars were engineered with longer service intervals in mind. Like the cam belts are right there at the front of the engine. They were driver's cars and usable. And for me, it's a return to Ferrari's kind of history of building front-engine V12 manual cars, and Ferrari notoriously not wanting to build the street cars. This was close as they could with the classic Ferrari lineage with that.
And they're coming up, they're 25 years old now.
They're 25 years old now, so you can bring them in, but it's...
Steven always said something that always stuck with me, and I've recycled this many times. The best Ferraris are Ferraris with big V12s in the front, or Ferraris with no carpets.
Yep.
This car applies to the first aspect
to the first
of it.
one.
But it also has a little bit of the no carpets
It's
mentality.
a little bit of the no carpet mentality with the cage.
So no
and
carpets
that.
would be like a 360 Challenge Rally, a 430 Scuderia, Pista, Speciale. Speciales, I think, are
criminally
incredible.
underrated.
Yeah, they're sick.
The 16M, I'm not a convertible fan.
16Ms, why are they so cheap?
Numbered cars,
Yeah,
open
that might
top.
be a good buy, right?
8,500 RPM.
Yeah.
Checks all the boxes.
Yeah,
and
16
you can
M's
get
is really...
people. That was in the area where people were getting creative with specs too.
Right.
Where you could get the carbon
That's true.
side. The
You're right.
carbon side
You're
skirts
right.
were becoming
there
a
are
big
a lot
thing.
of really tasteful spec 16Ms. I've seen them as well, and a lot more uncommon on the CSs, on the 360s. Most of them are red or whatever, black, silver, yellow.
They were a lot worse. They were a lot
blues,
safer.
one green or something. But on the 16Ms, I've seen some really good blue tan specs, grays, silvers, whites, matte whites. There's some good ones out there for sure. Speciale specs are amazing, and Apertas especially are amazing. 599s, GTOs are harder to find in good specs. They made some cool ones. I've seen some kind of non-metallic dark grays.
for another non-red GTO.
Yeah, we went through a period where we had like 6 people looking for non-red 599 GTOs. Ferraris are amazing. Porsches, I mean, Porsches are just such a great little subculture, and the 4.0s, the 997 2RSs, the 3.8s. The 3.8s and paint the sample colors have been going crazy. A huge fan of those cars to drive, to collect, to appreciate, to talk about. Steven's buddy Nate always has a good joke he makes about Porsche guys drooling over the color of the handbrake stitching to differentiate
Deviated
themselves.
stitching crew.
Yeah, kind of like Corvette owners and stuff. But you got to give it to Porsche. They've just got an amazing culture, and the cars are just fantastic to drive. And I've owned a couple Ferraris, and I've had a lot of headaches, and the headaches that I have with my Porsches are self-induced. They're not because they're Italian. So I've grown to appreciate the Porsche culture. Something to me that I think is widely underappreciated, and I hope we can work a little bit more on this in the upcoming future, and I believe we are the roof cars. I think if you're talking about tuner cars, there's the Gunthers and the Singers. I've sold all of them. I've sold Gunthers, Singers, roofs, and the way that these roofs are engineered and the depth of history and
Roof Yellowbird, the famous video of it driving at the ring, and
talk about the car video game generation or whatever. Like, this was what paved the way for just like badassery and hooning, which is so commonplace nowadays in terms of, guys doing driving videos and stuff.
Of course.
It's not novel to anybody who's watching. Anyone who's watching this channel right now knows about the impact that this video had, but I think on our generation, it just kind of, again, became like the beginning of hooning in a sense, which is now so widely common. So, it's so cool to see this.
I didn't realize there was a guy on the bike in the video.
Yeah, of course, man. You're on the Nürburgring. Yeah. I've had Code Brown moments on there a couple of times. I've overtaken minivans and all kind of delivery drivers and little mopeds and stuff. But the roof product is just, whether they're a W09 car or not, everyone's so fascinated by the W09.
What is a W09 car?
W09 is for a small German manufacturer. Roof is a legitimate manufacturer, and the W09 cars were VINed starting with W09, and it's to notate a body in white roof, meaning that they got the actual.
They built the car from the ground up rather than taking a car and tuning it.
Porsche gave them the actual shells, so to speak, to say, here you go, have at it. This is a roof.
Build it from the ground up. Don't just bolt your parts on it.
And so a lot of cars were converted in period, and some at later dates and whatnot. And I think that those cars, there's a huge price discrepancy. But talking about value, a period converted Porsche VIN roof is an amazing value, because a lot of it's it's marginally the same depending on which car you're talking about than a W09 in some cases. Some cases it's obviously not, but to be able to drive, if you're going to collect, W09 all the way. If you're going to drive and collect, you can step over to a non-W09 car. It's totally acceptable. I think those are horribly undervalued. I'd love to own one myself to drive and appreciate. And I think the roof has so many amazing sub variants and whatnot. It's so much fun to kind of sift through the weeds. They only made a couple hundred cars in their entire tenure, so it's just really incredible to chase after those and deal in them. I've sold some really cool ones, and super privileged to be able to have gotten to drive some of them and whatnot. And I think the brand and the community is really cool.
So I think kind of like where roof is kind of where roof is now is where I think AMGs are going in the next 5-10 years, where people looking for the individual pieces. And there's some discrepancies about, like, does it have the red German VIN tag, and kind of how roof has the W09 thing. A lot of the collectors try to get the red VIN tag AMG cars of the cars where they issue their own VIN, like AMG 124, then whatever the serial number is subsequent with that. So there's some, as AMG is getting more broadly accepted in the collector car space, guys are really going to chase after those Falterbach German-built red VIN tag cars.
Right. Similarly with roof,
it's going to be the same thing.
If it's a roof-built thing, it's different than if Roof Japan or somebody else built it. It's very similar kind of.
So there's that as well, and then with that, there's the other thing with the USA cars that they just never got them. There's a famous letter that's signed by Hans Werner Alfrecht to Richard Buxbaum saying you are licensed to carry the AMG flag here in the United States, which makes them just as much a car, but they don't have the VIN tag. And I think that's one of the other things where we're going to talk a little bit more about tuner cars.
Yeah, I think people naturally gravitate towards reassurance of being able to validate something
validation.
as authentic. So with the German cars, it's a bit easier because there's this telltale sign. But with some of the U.S. models coming out of Westmont and stuff, you need actual vindication that, okay, this is a real true AMG car, which is something that you specialize in, and we're super lucky to have you here for. But other than that, I think the next thing to chat on is kind of, we spoke about the F1, we spoke about our childhood cars, we spoke about some stuff we believe in, just kind of all over the place about, what might be an amazing value. But I think, John always says the F1 was the car of the 90s, and we believe that the Veyron was the car of the early 2000s.
Of course.
I think it's Veyron, and now it's becoming a little bit more appreciated to be some of the, the Zondas and the Koenigsegg's and stuff like that, that are really shining into their own, and have been over the last 10 years. But, the Veyron, I mean,
oh my gosh. I remember the statistics, the Top Gear stuff. They said at top speed, it consumes more air at the top speed run than an average person does in a year. I mean, every statistic about that car was super.
Yeah.
Everything. It really changed the game of what it meant to be. I think that was the car that had the impact on our generation that the Lamborghini Countach did for those prior. So I
think it was also the thing that cemented cars as I don't want to go too much out on a limb in saying this, but it cemented, at least for me, it cemented like super hypercars into pop culture in a sense, right?
Well, there was pop culture, and it opened the category for the hypercar.
Right.
So the McLaren F1, because they only made like 80-something cars or whatever,
right?
When they were $1 million.
Other than Wyclef Jean, having his moment with the F1.
Well, you had the F1, but then they kind of opened the door for $1 million cars, where now having production cars costing $1 million has been more normalized. But that was the car that really shook that. So.
Yeah, there were tons of celebrities that had the Veyron back in the day. It was the ultimate status symbol.
Of course. Everyone from Ralph Lauren to Lil Wayne. Right. If you were somebody in that era, you had that, and it was accepted by everyone.
The music industry loved the Veyron. I mean, my gosh. But again, for the car enthusiast community, I just feel like there's been this little bit of a sense of detachment of, I feel like it's shifted through time, but, at one point the Veyron was this pop culture icon and not so much a collector car, and then it was back to a collector car, and then people went back to a pop culture icon, and it kind of just like has been generally underappreciated in the collector market. And I think the big problem with that has been the service-related situations that have plagued kind of the ethos of the car in terms of ownership, and the costliness of it. And I never really understood that, because to me, growing up, the Veyron was this like ultimate status symbol.
Right.
So and just in life, you got to pay to play, right? So if you wanted a Veyron, if you had to spend $50,000 or $100,000 servicing it or for tires or whatever, to me, look, I'm not the one writing the check. I'm not buying. I don't own a Veyron, but you look at it and you're like, well, if you can afford to buy a Bugatti, like who cares if it costs this much kind of this kind of money to own or to operate? And I feel like it's been a negotiating point that's been stigmatized for
and
consumers.
It's just suppressed the cars for so long too.
Yeah, and it's just depressed the cars, and they should take off as a collector piece. And I'm not talking about the Super Sport or the Vitesse.
Right.
Those stand in their own light to me.
Correct.
They're an entirely different car. You can watch our video that we went over the differences, with those cars versus the standard Veyron. But the standard Veyron is just horribly underappreciated, in my opinion.
For the impact that that car had.
For the impact that it had, right.
It'll be interesting to see, because they've still been kind of dealer service their entire life, and there is a couple of independents that are actually really able to maintain those cars. So it'll be interesting to see how the independent market actually supports those cars.
I think that Bugatti will eventually, they'll understand, they've done such a great job with the Chiron program, and I've had the pleasure of selling, 5 or 6 Chirons at this point, and they included service, 4 years of service and maintenance with the purchase of the car from new. That was just, it ran with the VIN of the car. So if you sold the car, the next person had services and warranties and stuff included, which was awesome. And I think they learned from the Veyron program.
Yeah, support.
They also developed just like standard run-of-the-mill, Michelin tires for it and, all that kind of stuff. But I think that, if Bugatti can overcome that, I think the Veyrons have a ton of room to grow. Obviously, Carrera GTs, CCXs we believe a ton in. I think, there's a multitude of other cars we can think of, but that's what we've generally supported here, Diablo GTs and, 6.0s, and I think 6.0s have tons of room to grow.
Tons of room in 6.0s.
Incredibly refined, beautiful car.
Yep.
Very close to a Mercy, but still gives you that Diablo kind of presence and ethos, and it's still, it's right on the cusp of ultra analog 90s and early 2000s kind of refinement, whereas the Mercy balances that out more. The Diablo gives you a little bit more of that kind of older school feel, which is kind of nice to have for some people. Like I had a client reach out to me a few weeks ago and say, hey, what Diablo variant should I buy to putz around it?
6.0.
And I just was like, my initial thought was 6.0.
Yeah, if you want someone to do that, if you want something radical, get the GT. But if
right,
somebody
or an SE30. If you want something, to me, sorry guys, but I kind of relate a lot of the Diablo stuff to M3s, because you have like the SE30, which is kind of like this E36, and you have this 6.0, which is like this E46. Like that's kind of like how I look at them.
Of course.
The GT being like, I don't know, a CSL
E46
or something,
car.
right? Like the Halo car. So it's kind of how my brain works, unfortunately. But when it comes to Diablos, but I will say they are both period 90s, growing to early 2000s, so it kind of makes sense a little bit. But
so let's go wild here, because we've got some time on stuff. 2 million and up, you get 3 choices.
Unlimited budget?
2 million and up, 3 choices.
Oh man, that's too easy, man. You just gotta pick the most expensivest stuff.
Stuff that you like. No, stuff that you like.
As 2
though.
Chainz would say, most expensivest.
Yeah, but man, three things that you like.
It's tough
2
for me,
million
Steve. I'm. It's like going to a Victoria's Secret fashion show and saying, which one do you? I like all of them. I don't know. I mean, it's a tough one, but I think that F1 LM is the peak. I'm a super. I don't know what it is. The McLaren P1 always did it for me.
Yeah.
I know John and Herschel were talking about it on the last video, the W1. I don't even like thinking about the W1. It just makes me feel like the P1 values are going to go up so much that I'm not going to be able to afford one. By the time I'm able to be in the market for them, I'll be priced out. But the P1 GT, I think, is one of the coolest cars ever made.
How about the Lazante P1 LM?
The P1 LM is cool, but for me, it's the P1 GT, because the P1 GTR was roadified. All this gloss carbon on the interior. I love that green one. That's one of the sickest cars for me. I think I was talking about it with one of my buddies the other night. I don't know what it is about the car. It's kind of just, again, it's that tuner mentality applied to something that had this iconic kind of, mythicalness to me growing up when that car came out. So over 10 years ago now. Crazy how times fly. But that to me is this really, really cool package. So it's a road legal P1 GTR that's been maxed out, bored and stroked to 4 liters, Cosworth, probably shoots giant fireballs out, roof scoop, all the things you'd want in a car, canards, splitters, aero, this, that, whatever, big wing. It's really cool. To me, that's one that I'd have. Call it for less than 10 or 5 or whatever you.
So you got one more.
Oh man, that's tough. I love the Porsche GT1, but I think if I had to pick a GT car, if I wasn't picking the F1 LM, because that's $45 million, I think the CLK GTR Roadster.
I was going to say that, yeah.
Yeah, so you have the F1, you have the GT1, and you have the GTR, and you look at all of them, and they all were homologated, road cars from race cars that needed to be built to go racing at Le Mans, and et cetera, et cetera. But the CLK won the most races out of all of them. Okay, more than the F1. The F1 is, claimed because it won Le Mans. And it also was kind of like a super underdog in a sense too, in this new road car from this new kind of manufacturer at the time. But the GTR Roadster is so important to me because it's the only one out of all of them where you have no top, which is completely counterproductive to a race car. And so to me, it's just the ultimate unicorn of that. And to have been involved in the process of sale of 2 of them is insane for me to be able to enunciate aloud, especially being a car guy, and you're a Mercedes guy. So just to be in the sphere of all these cars is so amazing. But so that the P1 GT, which some people might give me flack for, but I don't care. I mean, it's very easy for me to just pick the craziest Zonda Venti, Zonda MD. One of these 6 Zondas is a no-brainer. But we're talking about crazy money here. I mean, I like to think of like a $5 million garage, and I'd have a Veyron, I'd have a CGT, and I'd have the last one I always kind of rotate and shuffle with. But if I had to, maybe Vitesse, I think that's the best Bugatti, if you ask me. A Carrera GT for that analog kind of manual V10. And then the last car in the 3rd car garage, I'd have to give it a little thought here. Let's see. So let's say you got 3 million, you got $1.5 million, somewhere around 3. So you only have 500 grand left to spend, So
COK DTM cab?
DTM cab would be cool, but I wouldn't need it because, I guess that's a cool choice. That's not a bad idea.
It's not bad. It rounds it out.
It's pretty good. So. Yeah, it's pretty good. I'd probably want something a little comfier, something that has a bit more. Ooh, M5 CS.
Done.
That car, you could fit 4 people. You got a trunk, you got a boot, you can get groceries.
Go on the tail of Dragon.
I owned one.
So
it
good.
was the best.
And it's green on tan.
It was green. It wasn't on tan,
but you had some gold accents.
I think that car is just such an underrated machine. They've held value. They haven't dropped a penny since I bought one in 2022 and then sold it. I drove all the best roads in the United States. I brought it back to Miami and I said, I don't need this car here. There's nowhere to go.
There's nowhere to use it.
And I sold it and I left it on a high note. And that's one car that I think is just for 150 grand is unbelievable. We've kind of gone all over the gauntlet here. We're just kind of freeballing it, Steven and I. First time doing this. Super excited to be able to share our kind of thoughts and stuff with you. But Steven, take it away with your 3-car, $5 million garage. What are you picking with $5 million bucks?
So I'm going to be wild with it. I'm going to do Miura SV. We're going to spend 4 on that. Okay. We're going to spend 4 on that.
Very curated of you.
Of course. Yeah. Well, and I think there's a lot to be said with that where that car you can do a lot with. And I think now people are chasing experiences and nostalgia, and there was a whole other thing with nostalgia, but people are chasing experiences now and what you can do with the cars, what are you eligible to do. So we just came back from this incredible rally in Jackson Hole and Salt Lake in the Rocky Mountains, and that was incredible. But with a Miura, you can go on these incredible vintage rallies like the Copper State 1000,
Colorado Grand,
and the Melee warm-up. To be example, I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact qualifications for each one, but then you can go take it on these incredible road rallies and you can show it at Pebble Beach. And the car still feels fast today. And the car defined a generation. It was one of the world's first supercars. To me, they look gorgeous. We're still getting a lot of young guys who are saying, Miuras are cool. So they're cool. The steering feel, the car was right behind your head. And it's fun, and when you're looking forward, sometimes it's best to look back and see the birthplace of this. So for me, Miura SV, the production numbers, the design, the history, what that car did.
What do you do with the other $1 million bucks?
So the other $1 million bucks, I'd say probably a manual Murcielago for one.
There you go.
So
that should have been my answer, actually.
Yeah, manual Murcielago. You don't need, with 500 grand left, then you buy a manual Murcielago. It's a car that's still fast. The Gen 1 cars, there's a lot of value there. And the lines are taken directly from the Miura. There's so much Miura SV in the Murcielago that people forgot about, from the taillights, the rear engine cover, the side skirts. It's the last of the line with the engine that traces the lineage back and forth. And with that, you can take it on events, you can service it, you can use it, and it's drivable. So which is the biggest thing. So you have your halo car, you have your vintage rally car, then you have your Saturday cars and coffee car. And then with the 500, I'd probably leave that as kind of, I think there's a lot to be said for vintage track days. So I think that's another fun thing where, growing up and playing the racing games and stuff like that too, where you want to get on track, you want to use stuff. So I kind of leaving that open. There was a really cool car. You can get the Ferrari 360s, the 360 challenge cars, or one of the other competition cars, which would make you
For
eligible
500
for
grand, you can pretty much get any
right.
challenge car,
So
yeah.
any of the challenge cars or any of the history, so then you qualify you for vintage motorsports. But a lot of that stuff is stuff you can use and support yourself, where you don't need a team to run them. Like some of the late '90s Le Mans cars that you can run and use. But for me, having something that you could go out and support and have a great long weekend and use and enjoy, I think that selection of stuff checks a lot of boxes. I think it really does.
That's awesome, man. That's a great answer. I realized that I might have 350 grand left over.
Okay.
Maybe I could fit a race car in there, but we're only on 3 cars. But
right.
But to be honest, I love driving road cars on the track.
Right.
Because you take that experience back with you, back into the car, back onto the road,
right.
back into your impressions of the technicalities and the details that you share with your friends or whatever when you're talking about your passions for the cars. I know a lot of people think I'm crazy for that. I have a bunch of clients who do a ton of racing, and whenever they shove me in a race car for a lap or whatever, I'm always moaning and stuff because I got to pull my leg over
right.
my head to fit inside and stuff. But race cars are obviously much better on the track than a road car, but just that kind of being able to take it back home with you.
Right.
So I think that's part of why, for me, I wouldn't have a race car in my lineup. I'd probably have like a Dawn or something.
Right. Something comfortable.
To take out on a weekend night like an older gentleman.
See,
but I'm living vicariously through a lot of my clients. Thank you guys all for listening and watching.
Thank you.
And hopefully we get the chance to do this again soon. And now everybody's got a little bit of a backstory as to kind
who
of
we are, how we came into
a little bit
this
of how we roll.
A little bit more.
I know I talked a lot about BMWs, but I don't like them that much. I only have 5 or 6. I like all kinds of other cars too. And we hope that you guys like, subscribe, and we'll see you again on the next one. If John lets us do this again, the whole rambling podcast of Gabe
I'm okay
and
with
Steven.
it.
Thank you, bro.
Likewise.
You got it.